Welcome back to On a Yellow, episode 8 now?
Number 9.
Number 9 now. Number 9, Oh Canada, where we're going to talk a lot about the interesting world of international football, because it's been an interesting couple of days with the international break, and there's been some interesting games and just some absolutely insanely good moments and why we love international football so much. So I want to start with the dramatic affairs in the Scotland game as my first ones.
You know, it was just a great campaign from Scotland. They really did. They did everything right towards their way, qualifying to their World Cup for the first time since 1998. It's been 27 years since we've seen the Tartan Army make it to the World Cup. It's a big deal for a lot of their fans. They're very passionate. It's very exciting times for them. Players like Scott McTominay having a bicycle kick goal in that game, and Kieran Tierney scoring a 90+3 goal to secure that qualification for the Tartan Army. And I think it just really speaks loads to they've kind of built something really good there, especially beating a good team like Denmark. I think it really proves that they're ready to make that step, and they've been building for it, and now the Tartan Army is ready to take on the world.
Yes, we're just having some issues with the overlay, so I'll continue from now on just talking, and then I'll fix the overlay in a second. It's just, you're not on camera, Zach, right now, so I'm going to have to fix the overlay quickly. But Scotland's been absolutely fantastic, and it's just, I've seen the Scottish fans, you can see what it really means to them, and it's just something absolutely impeccable. Just really cool and really neat to see, and what a goal that was.
I think if you told a Scottish fan that they'd have players scoring screamers from 45 yards out and bicycle kicks, they wouldn't believe you. They'd think you're talking about the Brazilian national team. But it's a new reality for the Scottish team. They're a very flashy team, I think. They have a lot of players that play really well together. They've built a good system. The players trust each other. And I think it's a good recipe for potential success at the World Cup.
And there we go. We finally fixed it. You were back on camera, Zach. It was kind of funny when I was changing the overlays for the camera. I kept just picking the whole overlay as a whole. So I would pick your camera, and you would be the background. So the episode just has me changing the cameras. We might keep that, we might not. But no, I think with the Scottish fans, it is a huge deal. And it's also just a huge resurgence for Scottish football. When England kind of dominated, a lot of the players moved from Scottish team, or from the Scottish national team and from the Irish national team to play for England. And now a lot of those players are playing for England. You got Declan Rice, you got Mason Mount, I'm pretty sure. All of them played for the Ireland national team as youngsters, and now they're playing on the English national team. But, it is really neat to see that it's kind of coming back to they're kind of coming back to their nations, or people are staying with the nations they were either born in, or they're going to the nation that they know they can't make it to the English national team, but they're going to now play for the Scottish or the Irish national team. And I liked what you said. You wouldn't believe what, looking now at the Scottish team and how much talented players they have, you wouldn't know that a couple of years ago, or you wouldn't say that. You'd be like, Scottish teams and Irish teams, they're not that good and they lose a lot of players to England, but now they're coming back and they are playing really well.
They've really built off of what I thought was a good Euro for them.
Mm-hmm.
They played really well in that tournament as well. So I think they've just, they've seen a lot more success recently.
Yep.
And, with that success, I think they've just kind of, kept building. And the players just really are starting to believe the system and the coaching. And I think it's really working out for them.
And yeah, and I think that's the Scottish belief. The fans believe it. The fans were absolutely impeccable during that game, and celebrating after that game. They were all truly happy. Now, moving across to a pretty close country to Scotland, Ireland, who may find themselves in a World Cup coming 2026.
They've qualified for the UEFA playoffs. There's lots of good teams in there still, so they have to win a couple games still.
Mm-hmm.
But they might have a new hero, a new man that you can lay that on a little bit with Troy Parrott.
Troy Parrott paradise in Ireland's last 2 games before the playoffs. He scored 2 goals to beat Portugal in a crazy game where Ronaldo was sent off, and he scored and became the hat-trick hero for an absolutely drama-filled show against Hungary.
I mean, there was just so much passion in that game against Hungary, especially after that goal. He's running with his shirt off.
Mm-hmm.
He's got 15 guys around him, just like having the time of their lives with that goal. And it's just, I think it's probably the most important Irish goal in recent time. They've really climbed again. Same as Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
They've built an identity. They have a lot of talented players like a Troy Parrott, who's very successful, in their domestic leagues especially. And I think they're a team that, now that they've got a couple wins in a row, dramatic fashion, or kind of dominant, I would say, against Portugal.
Mm-hmm.
They have a lot of success going into the playoffs, and I think that's something they can carry, even if they do play a tough team like in Italy or a Turkey.
And I think, it's just that passion for the game. And it's just that now they've beaten the Giants, and now they're going into this on a high note. And I feel like that passion will drive them. Also, they have a very good fan base. The Irish are a very good fan base, and I think that will take them potentially to playing in a World Cup. It will be hard playing in the World Cup, but it's something that every nation wants, because the best thing about the World Cup is the connection you get and connecting everybody within the nation to a common cause and a common goal. Obviously, in Scotland, you have the Celtic versus Rangers derby, which is almost a religious derby that we've talked about in previous episodes. But that goes goes out the door when Scotland's playing. It goes from you're a Celtic fan, I'm a Rangers fan, I don't like you, to we're supporting Scotland and our boys are going to the World Cup.
I think it's good to see, when there's so many dedicated fans in a country like Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
They have passion for their clubs, but they all come together as one is a really special thing. There's England, it happens to, Everton fans and Liverpool fans, they hate each other regularly, but the time that the World Cup comes around, the Euros come around, and England's playing, they don't really care about that rivalry. They're just cheering on, their national team, and the pride that they have from, seeing their team, a group of guys from the same country as them,
mm-hmm.
Having success and, dominating.
And yeah, I just really like the connection that the World Cup brings. And, to talk about that connection, I really want to talk about Haiti's qualification. So obviously Haiti has qualified for their first World Cup since 1974. But it shows how football is more than a game. It's more than just a game that we play. It's more than a game that we watch people play. It's a game that brings people together, but also in a place like Haiti that has faced economic turmoil, gang violence, and has had a pretty rocky pretty rocky history. All of, I think during that game, a lot of Haitian people forgot about all of the issues within their country, and they all went together for a common goal, and that was to watch their team get qualify for the World Cup.
The Haitian fans are just incredibly proud of what their team has been able to accomplish, especially without them being able to play home games at all. They haven't played a home game since 2021 against Canada because, gangs actually took over their stadium and they've overrun, a lot of the infrastructure there. So they've been playing at neutral sites, but that hasn't, I think it hasn't deterred them. I think it's, made them fight harder to, try and, bring the country together in some sort of way. Similar to the way that, Ivory Coast was on the verge of civil war back in the day, and the World Cup qualification kind of, stopped a lot of that and, changed things in the country drastically. I think it could be a similar, hope for Haiti in that kind of way.
And, it shows that a country can come together and they can heal from their past and also the issues that happen within their country. But it also just shows sheds some light or shows light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to these issues, and shows how football can connect anyone. And that's why football is such we call it the beautiful game. It's not just because of the beautiful things we see play out on the football pitch. It's because of the beautiful moments of bringing people together. And that's why we watch football. Football can be used, like we said, as a political tool, but it also can be used as a simple tool to connect the masses together to a common sport, right? We see the World Cup with a bunch of nations coming together. Yes, we want our nations to win, but the World Cup itself is an experience where, regardless of politics, regardless of who you are, everybody is connected, or even around the world, to football and watching their team play. And it's a really beautiful thing to see.
And a country that, they're getting to see their team for the first time on that stage is Curacao now. They broke the record for the smallest country to ever qualify for the World Cup, which was previously held by Iceland. They're significantly smaller than Iceland. They only have a population of 150,000, about the same size as, the cities Huddersfield and Cambridge in the UK. So it's just a good testament to how strong of a team they have there and how hard those people want to fight for their country.
Isn't their nation slowly dying because of the rocks and erosion? I know Tuvalu's like that, but
I don't think Curacao.
No,
like
Curaçao's. I know Curaçao's a small island, or a small chain of islands.
They've only been a country for about 15 years now, and they've only had a national team for about 14 of those, and to already have qualified, on the biggest stage, it's very impressive. Especially when you look 10 years ago, they were ranked 150th in the world. They've climbed all the way to 82 now, and I'm sure that will rise even more now with the qualification to the World Cup.
The World Cup, it's so important, and a lot of people in the United States that the World Cup is getting hosted in don't understand the gravity of what a World Cup is. A World Cup is in the name. It is the biggest sport tournament, I believe, in the world. You could say the Olympics and all that stuff, but the World Cup is huge. The numbers it brings, broadcasting-wise, it's huge. Consumer-wise, it's massive. There's a lot of money coming in to these countries that get it. But also, the World Cup offers way more, like we've talked about. It's connection. It's going and trying to, I think, it's that connection goes two ways. Connection goes ways of you're connecting with people, like-minded people, but it also goes you're connecting with other people from other countries regardless of their political situation, and I find that really neat. You can talk to someone even though they may be from a country that's government you don't support, but you have a shared love for football, and I feel like that's just such a nice thing to see.
I mean, the ability for a team like Curacao to qualify because, the tournament is expanded now, as well as, the three host nations, already taking their spots, so they didn't have to fight against, those bigger teams in CONCACAF. But even without those teams, there's still good teams in there, the Jamaicas, the Costa Ricas, the Hondurases, and the Panamas. Those are the clubs you really think of as the second tier in CONCACAF. Curacao went unbeaten in their qualifying run, winning 7 of the games and drawing 3 of them. And I think it's really special to see, just with the expanded tournament, more nations getting in, more nations that I think, deserve to be on that stage, especially when you look even into Europe with the Norways and the Austrias qualifying for their first World Cup in 27 years. I think just that the expanded tournament will bring more eyes, especially, and drive even more interest.
Exactly, and I feel like, well, it's just the World Cup. Like, regardless of where it is, people are gonna watch it. I always find like people, and I see a lot of them, they're angry that it's in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Now, I think they're more angry that it's in the United States than Canada or Mexico, because they say that the United States, even Canada, is not a footballing nation and doesn't deserve a World Cup. But little do they think like any country in the world that has a national team can host a World Cup, right? And I feel like that's also really cool. I think the best thing about the World Cup right now is it's shedding light on growing the game in North America, which is something that I think is really cool. I feel like, well, as someone that's lived in North America his whole life, I feel like soccer here and football here has been something that's kind of been, not been great, I think. And I feel like now it's getting better and better, but we just haven't had the infrastructure, nor have we had really the teams and the players. And I think, if you're watching football and soccer, you don't watch it locally as much. Like, I didn't grow up watching football locally. I grew up watching football outside of my own country. So I feel like this World Cup coming here is going to shed light, but also even the CPL final and all these things and the social media presence that brought, it's bringing and shedding light to North American football. It's getting people connected to football, a game that's not huge here. And it's just, I think it's just going to be a fun ride. And I'm really interested to see how the United States, Mexico, and Canada, how we respond to the World Cup, how we create fan environments that are levels above or kind of close to the level of a World Cup. And I think it's hard for our World Cup. It's a new format, though. It's 32 teams instead, right? Or is a little bit more? 48 teams now, right? Yeah. So the World Cup is increased in numbers. So I feel like with that, we see that there's all these new teams coming in, and I feel like that's really cool, because the best thing about the World Cup is giving opportunities to these smaller teams and these smaller nations to show what they have, right? And to give, it really gets huge amounts of money and also just recognition to these teams. And I think with that, the World Cup it's going to be different. But the thing I'm wondering about is, can we trump the other World Cup, the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, which was said to be one of the best World Cups of all time because of its World Cup final? I don't know if we can do that, but I know that with the teams in here and with more teams, the World Cup moments are going to be amazing, I think.
Just talking about, teams that, now that there's more teams and, potentially, oversaturating kind of,
Yep.
Maybe too many moments that it doesn't, there's not one that sticks out a ton. But I think that can be, kind of argued against by, all these teams coming in, their first World Cup or their first one in a long time. They'll be hungry to prove that that's where they belong. I think, teams like a Norway, they haven't made a World Cup in a long time, but I think they can come into this World Cup as a potential, a dark horse and, really give teams a hard time. I think they are a top team, especially with Erling Haaland. And, he's scored in every single qualification match for them. He's got 55 goals, I believe, in 48 matches with the national team now. So he's just, I think, players like that on teams that haven't qualified in forever, they're going to be very motivated, to win games. And I think that can, make this the greatest World Cup of all time.
Yeah, I think, well, with more teams, like you said, more teams brings the nicher teams that maybe have 1-star player, 2-star players on it to make it. And I think Norway's a team that's kind of, it reminds me of like a Sweden. Those Nordic teams have 1 or 2, and even they have fairly good teams, but star player wise, they got 1, 2, or 3 players that are really, really good. And they just never seem to be able to get to that higher level and get placements out of the group stage, even if they make the tournament or even make the tournament at all, right? We've been seeing Norway not be able to make certain international competitions, even though they have 2 very good players. And I think with Norway, it's their attacking presence that's really good. Obviously, you have Oscar Bob, you have Erling Haaland, you have Sorloth, and you also have Martin Ødegaard.
Yeah, you can add, Nusa to that as well on the other wing.
Exactly.
They have a lot of really good talent, especially young talent right now.
Young talent, and it's just a team that is really going to be really neat to see. I think the best thing about this World Cup format being new and having more teams, as we said, you're going to see new teams, and I think that's one thing I like about it. You get more teams to get chances. More teams get chances, which I find is really good. You can force connection that way. But another thing I really love about this system is you get the nicher teams that are playing in harder to get in groups, I think. I think UEFA is a harder qualification group than a lot of other qualification groups are. So I find it is difficult for some teams, especially if they have good players, just because of how the draw went in their group. They could be faced with France and the Netherlands and maybe tie one game, but all those teams win the rest of them. So I feel like it's going to be really cool to see some of those teams. And we look at those teams, like they say, oh yeah, Norway didn't qualify for the World Cup. Norway hasn't qualified for the world, any international competition for, Euros.
Their last major competition was Euro 2000.
Yeah, Euro 2000.
So they haven't even qualified for, European championships.
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see players like Erling Haaland, because we talk about Erling Haaland as a player that could possibly be one of the best players of all time just because of his ability, his goal-scoring acumen, but we never see him really play in an international competition. Obviously, we talk about players the likes of Robert Lewandowski, who plays for the Polish national team. But we've seen him play in international competitions and be their star player to drive them to wins in games that it didn't look likely. Haaland is that person in the sense of they're qualifying. But, with Norway, they haven't qualified for anything. So I think a lot of their fans are going to be really, really happy. I don't know. I think you're correct with that assumption, I think, with Norway being a possible dark horse. They have an insane attacking threat, and they're getting better and better on the defensive end as well. And I feel like in a group stage kind of format, they could really shine. Obviously, having a goal scorer in the prime of his career, being one of the best goal scorers of all time, you're likely to get goals out of him. So I don't think Norway will be the team where it's they could possibly be a dark horse, but maybe because they have good defenders, but the attackers are a bit shaky. They got attacking threat. I think the defense is a little bit shaky, that they have to maybe worry about that. But if you can score more goals than you concede, then you win games, right? So I feel like Erling Haaland and maybe Martin Ødegaard if he's healthy, and Sorloth as well, and Oscar Bob and Musa, all these players, I think will add to Norway possibly getting into the elimination rounds, because it goes to the round of 32, then the round of 16, then it goes to the quarterfinals, semifinals, finals. So it's going to be a longer tournament. but you need players that can play more and more games, and that's what a professional Erling Haaland will get you.
And another team that I think people kind of forget about them because they haven't qualified for anything. As Austria, they've qualified for their first World Cup in 27 years, same as Norway and Scotland. All those teams were at World Cup '98. I think all three of those teams, they have good players on those teams. And, you look at, the captain of Austria, David Alaba, he's playing in his first ever World Cup at the age of 33. I think it's something that he's going to, be very motivated in. He's a great defender. He can drive the attack a little bit even. So I think, for a country, kind of as small as Austria is in Europe, only 9 million population, I think it's a very special moment for them. Yeah, I'm pretty sure their fans are very, very dedicated. They have good club teams there. And I think it could be another team that, could maybe pull out a win against a team you wouldn't expect.
Well, they have players, I think with a lot of the European teams, a lot of those players play in Europe. And I think that's a big asset because a lot of them play for teams in the top 5 leagues. So they either play or play against top players. And I feel like teams that lack that maybe will struggle a little bit in international competition because, Norway, it's funny because you think these teams, and we talk about Scotland, Norway, and Austria, and we talk about them how they haven't got into an international competition since France 1998. But if you look at their squad and you look at who they have some very good players and very professional players and players that are starting for teams that are the top of the top 5 leagues. And you look at other teams that haven't made that in a while or maybe have made it every year. They don't even have they have maybe one player in the top 5 leagues. It just shows how difficult I think the UEFA competition is in Europe. To get into the competition from being a European team, it is very difficult comparatively to a lot of other teams. I like the system that they do, and I don't think the system should change. It's just Europe and European teams are really good teams. They have really good players. I feel like that's also just the climate of how European football is made. We talk about the top 5 leagues, and all of them are in Europe. So European teams that have academies and bring up their players, of course their national teams are going to be good.
Yeah, I think, we can talk about, academies, especially when you look at the U17 World Cup, players, a lot of players, that play in that kind of tournament, shows you what the future for, the senior national teams could be. There's a lot of those teams have players that are in academies of those top 5 top 5 leagues and, teams in those leagues. And I think it kind of, speaks to, I think having those international competitions for, U17 and U21 even, it's very important, for their growth, getting to play for their nation, understanding the impact that it has. I think it's important to, instill those values in players at young ages.
And, we've seen some glimpses of North American talent in the U17 World Cup, and also just talent from nations and areas you wouldn't think of when you think of football. Obviously, I believe North Korea did decent in their competition. Obviously, that's a team that you don't normally think of when you think of international football. And also another one is the United States national team with Kevin Sullivan. I mean, I don't know how good they did in the tournament because I've not really been focusing on that tournament, but I know Kevin Sullivan had a great tournament. I don't know if they're out yet, but
yeah, they got out in the round of 32 to Morocco.
Okay, but with Sullivan in the group stage, I think he got man of the match every single game that the United States has had. And he is going to be a future Man City player in the next year, I believe. Or if it's U17, he's 16 now? 17? I think he's 17 years of age, so I feel like it's one more year until he's 18. But he was signed by Man City when he was 14 years of age. And he's also a very promising young footballer in the United States footballing system. Got brought up through the ranks in, I think, Philadelphia's academy. And now he's playing in the MLS, I'm pretty sure. But he could be playing in like MLS Next, which is the academy system. But he can't play for Man City until he turns 18 because he's a foreign player, and they don't allow foreign players to play in Europe until they turn 18 years of age. That was the same thing with Estevao, and now Estevao is starting for Chelsea. So you never know. Kevin Sullivan, the American, could be starting for Manchester City in the near future.
Another young player, I didn't have him written down on any of my notes, but you reminded me of him. It's Dastan Satpav, who plays for the Kazakhstan national team. He's 17 years old, and he's one of the leading scorers in their domestic league. He scored his first goal for the men's team recently. He's played 6 games for them. And, talking about players, moving over, foreign players moving over to academies in England, Chelsea have his signature for when he turns 18. He'll move over there in August. I think it's important, for, when a player, from maybe an obscure country, they show glimpses. I think, getting that move to a European academy, an English academy, is a big catalyst for their career.
Yeah, honestly, I think it's just really cool. I think with the U17 World Cup and even the World Cup now, with the larger format, the larger amount of teams, it's really neat to see some of the obscure teams that you wouldn't really associate with football, like a Kazakhstan. Honestly, even to Canada, it's really neat to see those teams in World Cups. And just, it's probably really neat also, for Canada, it's so neat for us to see our team in a World Cup, which is one of the biggest footballing it is the biggest footballing competition in the world. And Canada, well, we're hosting it, but Canada is involved in it, and we're playing in it, and we get to show who we are. And I think with Canada as well, a lot of people know our nation, and a lot of people know our nation in football because of the rising stars on the team. Now, I want to move on to talking about Canada, because Canada obviously ended their losing streak, beating Venezuela.
Well, they didn't have a losing streak. It was just a winless streak.
A winless streak. Well, a winless streak. Yeah, I guess they tied some games.
A couple draws in a row. They were struggling to find some goals.
Mm-hmm.
Against Ecuador and the first match of this window, they also, a 0-0 game against Ecuador there.
Mm-hmm.
But, that game was kind of ruined, in my opinion, by a 6th-minute red card. That was a bit of a poor decision in my eyes, because when you give out a caution like that so early in the game, it kind of ruins both teams' plans for the game. Both teams kind of come in trying to test things out against one another, and you see how their changes work in a full 11v11 game. But when you take a player out, it kind of forces a Canada to play super defensive. And it doesn't really, give Ecuador the opportunities, kind of to want to play the way they want to. But I think it's kind of seen a lot in a lot of Canada games. I feel like there's a lot of red cards in, our friendly matches. I'm not really sure why, there seems to be so many in our matches, especially for players like Ismail Kone. I think that is his second one now. He got a red card in the game against Venezuela, so we have back-to-back red cards.
Do you think that it's like disciplinary issues, or is it more just really poor decision making by the referee?
I think it's poor decision making, and then they don't even look at it on VAR at all.
Yeah,
they kind of just make it their final decision.
Well, it seems like they just go like a straight red.
Yeah, it's just straight red and immediately over. They don't. They don't really ever kind of change the decision. I think, it was a bad foul 6 minutes in, but I don't think, 6 minutes into the match it's wise to, hand out a red card for, a challenge towards the ball. even if he doesn't hit the ball and hits the player's leg. I think it's a bit of a brash decision.
Yeah, it seems a little bit. Well, especially that early in the game, those are game-changing moments. I mean, if it's blatant and the guy's like leg is broken because he got absolutely two-footed by the opponent, I mean, that's when you warrant the red card situation. But at least if you give out the red card in those moments, look at VAR, really make sure that your decision is warranted, and I think that's something they just don't do. And I mean, 6 minutes into the game, I wouldn't give out a red card 6 minutes into the game unless it was completely blatant and a complete violation of the game and its rules. Because I mean, I looked at the fouls conceded, especially for the first red card, the Venezuela game, I believe.
Ecuador game was
Ecuador
the first game.
Okay, so for the Ecuador game, it was a weird challenge. He had his foot a little bit high, but I don't even think he touched him to the extent that the guy that got hit really kind of acted out. I think it was a little bit of a dive, and I feel like I just don't think you just give out red cards really early, but it's really weird. I've been looking at OneFootball, and I get all these notifications for the national team and, who's playing, who's winning, who's doing all that stuff. And every single game I see of Canada, there's always a red card, whether it's the team they're facing or it's Canada. And a lot of it is against Canada, and Canada gets a ton of these red cards, and I get really confused. I don't know if it's disciplinary issues. I don't really think it is. I think it's poor decision making, but again, I don't think it's in ill intent. Like, there's nothing like, I don't like you, so I'm going to do a big challenge, right? And I just feel like they really, I don't know. They need to find, like, Jesse Marsch needs to find what is the problem with our team, in the sense, why are we getting these red cards, and needs to make some decisions quickly, because even if the red cards might not be because of disciplinary issues, it's another issue of why we're getting all these red cards that needs to be addressed before coming the World Cup.
The one in the Venezuela game, Kone's going up in the air for the ball. He sees that he's not going to be able to, get the ball, so he puts his leg down, and then he hits shoulder on shoulder with the guy, and the guy goes to the ground and rolls around, and then they give him a red card for that. But I think, and the ref was like 2 feet away from it. I think that's just a footballing incident. I don't think that's any ill intent to take the player out, when he's in the air, and he made an effort to move his foot down so he didn't hit him with studs to the stomach area.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think it's just really weird. Like, it is really weird that we get red cards almost every single game that the national team plays. And I don't really, if I was in Jesse Marsch's shoes, I don't really know. It's not, I don't look at disciplinary issues. Like, I don't see that, like, it is because they don't have discipline. I just feel like it's decisions that are out of their control, really, and they're just playing a hard game, and they're getting penalized for it.
I still think, within CONCACAF, there's still a bit of, bias towards, teams that were, historically good. They've been playing a lot of, CONMEBOL teams recently, but they're still, refereed by a CONCACAF, FIFA referee, people, from countries like Mexico. And I think there's still a bit of a bias against Canada. They see a bad foul and they kind of, in the back of their mind, they kind of just reach for the red. I think it's kind of been an issue for a little while within CONCACAF. It seems like in a lot of games, especially, like a Canada game against Guatemala, the one that knocked us out of the Gold Cup, we got a red card in that game, and I think that was a bit of a brash decision. He didn't look at VAR in that match either. And I think it's still just a little bit of bias in the refereeing.
Yeah. Now, moving on to just the World Cup, what do you think Jesse Marsch and the Canadian team, after seeing them play for the friendly matches, what do you think is like the biggest thing that our team needs to consider to have some success in this tournament?
We need consistent goal scoring because a lot of our matches they kind of end in 0-0 draws.
Yeah.
We're playing good teams, sure, but not being able to score is an issue within the team. Promise David's kind of been the only guy actually scoring goals in terms of our strikers. Jonathan David's been very low form with Juventus. Tani Oluwaseyi, he's only just recently moved to Villarreal. He doesn't get a ton of minutes. He's kind of still a bench player there. Kyle Larin, he's playing well in the Dutch league, I believe now. That's where he's at. But he's kind of never really been my favorite striker for the national team. I think just getting constant goal scoring, consistent goal scoring would be the biggest issue and the biggest thing we need to look for going into the World Cup, because I think our defense has really been, grown over the last couple of years. We have a lot of strong defenders, especially adding a player like Alfie Jones to the Canadian team in this window. He has made his debut against Venezuela. He was very strong defensively. I think, defense is not an area of issue. If anything, it's attack and, starting the right goalkeeper.
Now, you said starting the right goalkeeper. Who is the right goalkeeper?
Maxime Crepeau is the right goalkeeper in my eyes. I don't care whether, Dane St. Clair wins goalkeeper of the year in the MLS. He's never really shown anything to me, for the national team that, shows that he's the one that deserves the starting spot. Crepeau, was our starting goalkeeper for most of Copa America, where we made it and finished fourth. I think, and then after that, Crepeau, kind of lost his spot at his club in the MLS, and then since then it's kind of just been Dane St. Clair's net. I don't necessarily agree with that. Dane St. Clair played one of the games, and then we had Crepeau in for the other game against Venezuela, but I think Crepeau deserves the starts. He's brought results for us. He made saves in penalty shootouts, which is something we were needing from Dane St. Clair in the Gold Cup, and it just didn't happen, and that's how we got knocked out, I think. And then, bringing in a new face as well. We've brought in a couple new goalies into the program recently. We brought Owen Goodman over from England. He was formerly, kind of an England youth international, played a couple games, but now he's got his Canadian national citizenship. He's been saying that a lot, like in media, that his dream is to play for the Canadian national team. He still says he feels more Canadian than English, and so I think he's only 21 years old. He's been a very good goalie in EFL leagues. He played 50 games for Wimbledon last year, and in the league he had 21 clean sheets and a 71 save percentage. And this year he's played 7 matches in League One. He has 4 clean sheets. I think he's kind of the future of our net. He's playing in, I think, personally, a fairly even league with the MLS sometimes. League One,
Yep.
I think, is a bit underrated. And I think, we've brought in another guy who plays in the MLS. I think his name's Hybert or something like that, and he's another young goalie. So I think if anything, now is the time for Dane St. Clair to really prove that he deserves the starting spot over any of the other guys.
Well, if you're playing in League One and you're also young, I mean, you have a ton of chances to play higher level. And I just think I honestly think League One's better than the MLS sometimes, or at least equal. The MLS is good in its own way, but it's a different style of game, and I feel like if you want to, great squeaking noises there. I don't know what that was, but it was something. But no, I think in those leagues you have to be really Well, I think it's just they play the type of game that a European competition and international competition is. The MLS doesn't really, in my opinion. The MLS is a completely different game when it comes to it, and I think the international competitions, they move to more of a League One style, which is very cagey. It goes to goal scorers that are a little bit more robotic that are getting those things, because finesse players, I don't know, but the type of game in the World Cup, in my opinion, is more of a cagey affair. It's a little bit more of a League One style, because people are so passionate about their team and they want their teams to win. And I think that passion it can't be beat, because it's the passion of your nation. It's the passion of who you are. And I feel like a goalie that's been playing in those situations, I think, could be the future of this team. And I agree with you. I think Crépeau is the main man. I feel like Crépeau is a little bit more calm. I feel like he goes out and makes himself large all the time. Sometimes he goes out a little bit too much, and I think that's the one thing he has to work on is don't go out all the way if you're not going to get the ball, especially against people that are high in quality. They're just going to chip you, right? But I think Crépeau showed in the Copa America that he was the main man. And I just think even Dane Sinclair, he wasn't good enough, and he wasn't good enough when we were playing against Mexico, when we were playing against all these other teams in international friendlies. And I think that Crépeau should be the one starting. And it doesn't matter if you're not having minutes on your team or you're the backup keeper. It's whatever works, right? It's whatever you think works. In the 2010 World Cup, I believe it was 2010 World Cup, in the Netherlands were playing in the semifinals and they went to penalties. Instead of keeping the goalie that they had on, they subbed in Krul to play and do the penalties, because he was the better person to do the penalty shootout. Even though he didn't even have the better record, it's just he was believed to be the better person. So I think that it doesn't really matter what record you have. It's just how the manager thinks is who is going to be the best. And it also doesn't matter where you play sometimes. It also doesn't matter like when you play and how much you play. I feel like in international competitions, it's just how everything clicks. It's how you play with the national team under a World Cup banner, and I feel like that's different. And you have to be a certain type of player for that, and especially for a goalie. So I just think Crépeau is that person. I think he's a bit more composed in the net, and he saves the ball a little bit better than Dave Sinclair. I just think St. Clair plays like a goalie in North America a little bit. He plays like a North American style goalkeeper. And North American style goalkeepers, in my opinion, aren't great. They make poor decisions. And I feel like the European goalies, even the goalies that are on the teams like Norway, they're a lot better actually than our goalies, because they play a European style of game. They've been brought up into a ton of academies, and I feel like that's the difference. And I feel like in our day and age as well, in North America, the goalkeepers, they play a certain way that's not what you see on a TV screen in watching a European game. They don't parry the ball in the right location. They're almost frantic and they don't look composed, versus goalies in Europe and in South America, they're extremely composed. The ball flies towards them and they parry it into a good direction. Goalies in North America, they like to just punch it out and they make poor decisions sometimes.
A little bit more about Owen Goodman. He plays for Huddersfield on loan from Crystal Palace. He's been part of the Crystal Palace academy for his whole career over in England, really. So I think playing in an English academy, as high as standard as Crystal Palace, I think they have a pretty underrated academy. A lot of good players have come out of there. He's definitely potentially got a good footing to come in and kind of take that starting role for, and maybe not for the World Cup, but down the line. But I think now, without any more matches scheduled between now and the World Cup for Canada, now is the time for them to have camps, finally train a lot in and make the right decisions for the World Cup roster. Who do we start? Make sure we have all of our top players healthy. Make sure Moise Bombito's healthy. Make sure Alphonso Davies is healthy. I think it's important to incorporate the new faces in Alfie Jones, give Owen Goodman reps as the starting goalie, see how he does, in like full team scrimmage kind of situations. And another player that they're kind of, testing out in the system is Marcelo Flores. He's a young forward slash midfielder. He plays in Mexico for Tigres. He's only 22. And he's played games for the Mexican national team, but he was born here in Canada, and he's been training with the national team in this most recent window. He played in Spain for a season at Real Oviedo or Oviedo, something like that. And he's an Arsenal Academy product. He had 16 goals and 7 assists with the Arsenal Academy during his youth career there. I think he could be a player that just adds, that pivotal, speed on the wing, potentially, play a cam position maybe, or, left mid, right mid kind of position, and, be a pivotal depth piece for us on the bench in the World Cup.
Yeah, what do you think will be something, like, you obviously talked about goal scoring and all that stuff, but this is, the World Cup is a different animal. What do you think is what we truly need, like Canada needs, to win their first ever game in the World Cup? Because obviously the groups they're not going to be easy. They're not going to be smooth sailing.
Well, I think, for us, because we're in the first pot, it kind of tends to, since you don't have to play one of those other top teams, I think, it could help us out. Especially with the expanded format, there's, some lower class teams, you might say. I think, if anything, this year will be set up for more success.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, 2022 World Cup, we kind of had the group of death.
Well, we had Croatia,
Belgium, and Morocco.
Yeah, who all played really well.
That's just, a team like Canada coming into that group.
Mm-hmm.
We did get a point, but it was a hard-fought group, a very close group.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we haven't really seen a fully healthy team with all the new players in a little while here. Alphonso Davies has been injured.
Yep.
Moise Bombito's been injured. We've been missing, Tejan was out for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So I think once we have all of those players back, have our defense being, at 100%, Richie Larea, Alfie Jones now, you have Moise Bombito, Derek Cornelius, and Alphonso Davies. I think that's a very strong defensive line. And you put Crépeau behind that, I think having that defense, kind of can help us, focus a little bit more on, in the last run here up to the World Cup, focusing on, getting consistent goal scoring, building a system that our strikers can score in. And I think incorporating Promise David more as the second striker as opposed to Tani Oluwaseyi, I just think he's got more. He's proven himself more in Europe in the Belgian league. He scored a lot of goals there, and I think he's more of a better, more of a complement player to a Jonathan David. Tani Oluwaseyi, he's kind of got the same frame and style, in my opinion, to a Jonathan David. Whereas, Promise David's a little bit bigger. He can play in the air a little bit more, and I think it's a better complement.
Do you think that with Jesse Marsch, do you think he would play a two-striker formation, or do you think he's going to rely heavily on Jonathan David as that Canada's main man to drive the attack?
Almost every single match under Jesse Marsch has used the two-striker formation.
Mm-hmm.
With right mid and left mid kind of, playing wing as well. I think every single match recently has had Tani Oluwaseyi and Jonathan David, and neither one of them has scored. So I think, Promise David having scored kind of deserves that spot over Tani.
Yeah, and I think, where does Tani Oluwaseyi play? He plays in Spain, right?
He plays for Villarreal with Tejan Buchanan. So I think he kind of, sees that,
Mm-hmm.
they play on the same side. They kind of want to, they see that they play together at the club level, and they want to build off of that. But I think it's just not working the way that they want it to at the moment. And I think Promise David's kind of more of a complement player to a Jonathan David, who's kind of more of a smaller striker.
Yep, the David and David connection. Now, another thing, like, do you think that Alphonso Davies, we see a lot in the Canadian national team, Alphonso Davies has more of an attacking presence than when he's on Bayern Munich. Do you think we'll be playing him in more defensive left back role, or we'll push him back up to the left mid winger role, where we've seen glimpses of him being very dangerous at that position?
I think, with now having Nico Siger in the team, it kind of gives us flexibility to play him either or. Kind of even switch up that, mid-game if you want to. Play those guys on the same side. Both of them, they can play left mid. So I think having those two guys as being able to kind of move into an attacking role kind of helps them out. I think it will make it so, Jonathan David has someone on that side that can help him out. And, both of those guys, they're very fast players. Nico Siger's got multiple assists in recent games. So I think he's kind of proven that he can also play left mid. So I think either way we'll have a strong left side. And I don't think it's too much of an issue whether Alfonso's playing fullback or Nico's playing fullback. They both have strong suits on that side, so I think it gives us a lot of flexibility.
Well said. Now, obviously, World Cup, we'll know the groups early in December here. But there's one more thing I want to talk about before we end our podcast, and that is just kind of a glimpse into the Premier League this weekend. Obviously, international break is over, and the Premier League season is back for another match day with some interesting matchups, one being the North London Derby. And I'm interested in that because we Arsenal's number one right now, and we talked about them having a winning mentality, and we want them to kind of show us that they can be the team to win. And Tottenham is 5th place. Now, why is this interesting? Well, if Tottenham loses and Man United wins, then Man United gets a little bit higher up. And that's the only reason why I want to talk about that, is because Man United have a pretty good schedule. And if we can keep up the same form we had in October, we could come out of this very, very happy. Because we play Crystal Palace, Bournemouth. Well, our first team is Everton. I think it's Everton, Crystal Palace, or Bournemouth. Then it goes West Ham, and then it goes Crystal Palace or whatever, Bournemouth. It's confusing, but we're playing them. So hopefully with this North London Derby, we can maybe see a potential Tottenham lose. And obviously, I don't want Arsenal to win, but I would rather Arsenal win than Liverpool and Manchester City to win. So maybe, hopefully, Arsenal win, and then maybe Man United wins as well, and we can do that. Maybe you'll see another West Ham win and be, 3 games in a row?
I think, we have a tough opponent coming up with Bournemouth, so it'll be...
Maybe get a tie out of that game.
A draw would be a good outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Especially since, it's a home game for Bournemouth.
Yeah.
Kind of a terrible stadium, but it looks like it's supposed to rain in that game too, so, never know in the rain.
You never know in the rain. All right. We're going to end the show here. We talked a lot about the next World Cup in 2026 in North America, United States, Canada, and Mexico, to be more specific. Now, do you want to do your sign-off, Zach?
Bonjour, au revoir, and have a good rest of your night.
See you later, guys.